Hi everyone, this is Grace, and today I'll be walking you through how I made this birthday set. So let's go. I am beyond excited to share this with you. I've been asked to do a birthday theme for probably since the beginning. And I've done specific birthday sets for people in my life, including myself. Wait, no, including myself. I haven't made myself a birthday set. Anyway, the point is, I've been asked a lot, and especially since I started doing classes, a lot of people have been asking me to do a birthday set. But to come up with something that is universal enough, but specific at the same time to be like sold as a class, for example, was hard. And I wanted to do it on circles, which was even harder to come up with something that was approachable. I wanted this to be an advanced beginner level. So I consider my advanced beginner classes to be really like middle of the ground. They can be done by all skill levels. If you're more of a beginner, it's clearly going to look more beginner, but if you're more advanced, it's an opportunity to really hone your skills and do it as well as I do it. So I had a tall order here and a limited color palette. I mean, there were so many things to think about, and I have to say, I'm really proud of what I've come up with. So let's start by this first cookie, which is the cookie that says happy birthday, because you can't really have a birthday set without something that says happy birthday, right? So I really thought long and hard about how I could do this approachably. Lettering is hard. I usually use a projector. I often use a projector when I do lettering just on my own for sets, but this one I obviously didn't want to have to include a projector, all that good stuff. So I actually worked with a friend, Bossy Brushstrokes, who Arlena, that's her actual name, to do custom lettering on a circle like this. And at first I thought we were going to do pressure piped lettering, because that's really the prettiest lettering, where you have like thicker downstrokes and thinner upstrokes. But as I was thinking about the most approachable way to do this, I actually ended up with this. I don't know. I think Arlena she's a calligrapher, so she has different terminology than I do. I think about it in terms of icing. She thinks about it in terms of calligraphy. So this is just like normal round piping. And what I love about this design is that it is meant to kind of hug the shape of the circle. It's meant to look kind of funky. And then what I did, the touch that I added, was to add sprinkles. What I love about this is it adds visual interest, but it also distracts. Y'all know how much I love to add design elements that distract from mistakes. So chances are your lettering is not going to be perfect. And look, mine isn't either, because y'all, we are freehanding this lettering. But look at that. Like, you add a little bit of sprinkles, a sprinkle of sprinkles, and no one can tell if your lettering is not perfect. And again, it's supposed to look kind of funky anyway. Now, the key though with those sprinkles is to just add a tiny bit. If you add too much, it's easily going to overpower the letters and you won't be able to read it. It's not supposed to be a situation where you're supposed to like cover all of the piping with the sprinkles. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, the consistency that I used for the lettering is my soft peak piping consistency. That's the outline consistency for this entire set. And typically, when I'm doing a 2 consistency outline and flood, which is what this set is, I do soft peak piping for the outline and a thin flood for the flooding inside. If your icing is on the thicker side though, you saw when I did that lettering that I did half a word at a time, and that is so that I could get the sprinkles on there before the icing crusted over. If your icing is thicker though, you may need to do fewer letters at a time. This cookie here, I had fun with. So I was flooding that, and I slightly under flooded that because I knew I was going to be adding a decent amount of extra icing with these polka dots. And the polka dots are very intentionally done in a round like this because I wanted to be able to see as many polka dots as possible after adding this cutie patootie on top, which, as I was trying to come up with different imagery, like general imagery for for birthday. Birthday hat is what came up. I don't know how many people still wear birthday hats. I think, well, at least as a kid, birthday hats were mandatory for all birthdays. The theme for this set, which I didn't mention at the beginning, is sprinkles, like funfetti. That was my idea behind this because I felt like, you know what, that's a pretty generically celebratory theme, and I'm pretty proud of myself. All but 2 of the cookies have sprinkles on them, and if you purchase the class, which is linked in the description of this video, I have the sprinkles that I use specifically from Amazon, but then I have a bunch of other ones that I tested out and tried. So that is the cute little party hat. Added a little crackle, of course. But that generally speaking, what I'm using are small rainbow non-prize. The idea is that you can just use whatever you have access to. I tried out a whole bunch and I picked the kind of color palette that I liked the best. But these colors the colors of this set are, just kind of fun rainbow-y. And speaking of the colors, you can absolutely customize these colors. Again, I just tried to pick the most, I guess, generic or universal. That's a better word. Universal colors. Yellow, purple, pink, and blue. So, if you're making this for a boy's birthday and you don't want to have pink, then sub out the pink for something else. Or if you're making this for a girl's birthday and you'd rather have like teal than blue, whatever. It's super easy to swap out. It's just fun, bright colors. This next design here is ultimately going to have a number on it. So again, when I was thinking about how to make this easy and accessible, like I really struggled with birthday because you really want to be able to customize birthday cookies. I got the happy birthday done, yay. But then most people, they want to have the age. They might even want to have something specific to the person's name. So this one is the age. Now, granted, some birthday parties are not going to want to have the age, which is totally fine. Instead of putting the age on this one, you could just do a heart. You could do the person's initial, their name. The name might be hard because we're covering it in sprinkles, which we'll see in a second how brilliant this is. This technique here is essentially it's wet on wet. It's just, excuse me, flooding one section next to each other because the sections are so large. You wouldn't want to flood like the entire thing pink and then try to cover all of those sections with the different colors. That would be way too much icing and it would absolutely flood over. So we're flooding in sections, but it's not actually the technique flooding in sections. That makes any sense. The technique flooding in sections, you let each section dry, but this one we're just flooding the background, so we want the whole thing to be flat, right? And I outlined the different sections because when you're doing something this large, it actually helps the icing to stay in place and it makes it easier. You want to let that dry for at least like 1 to 2 hours, probably at least 2 hours. You want it to be basically satiny smooth to the touch. And then this here is the soft peak piping consistency again. And y'all, it doesn't really matter how messy you piped that. And then you cover it in sprinkles. And let me tell you, I didn't come up with this concept of covering piping in sprinkles, no. But when I realized I could do this for the age and the name letter, name letter, the first initial, that goes on the cake top. I was just so proud of myself because this is incredibly forgiving. You can see here, even if you didn't really like how you piped it to begin with, just use that scribe immediately after covering it in sprinkles. For this one, I don't recommend like sticking the cookie in the sprinkles. You'll see, I think it's the next one where we're actually going to stick the cookies in the sprinkles. This one, you're pouring the sprinkles on top. And That is for a couple of reasons. One, I just don't like for this, you want the letters to be kind of, or the numbers to be kind of puffy. If you press down on the icing with the sprinkles, it's going to kind of press the icing down, if that makes any sense. And then second, your base flood has to be incredibly dry to be able to do that technique. So here, this is what I mean by pressing it down. This is, again, the soft peak piping. I'm squeezing like a mad woman, doing like flood piping here, basically. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. I would recommend not going all the way to the edge with this squeeze. And then this is the other way to do sprinkles. Press it in. For this one, it just made more sense since it's a border. I really wanted to get the sprinkles in there. Yeah, I don't know. It just made sense in my brain. And then I'm using my Thingamajiggy by the Cookie Countess. That's that pink little tool. But you can use a knife, whatever you have, and just kind of smooth it all out to encourage it not to flood over the edge. And then let that crust, or like dry for 10 to 15 minutes. Doesn't really matter. You could, in theory, I think probably flood it right away, but I always let it dry just for a little bit. And then we're flooding in here with this beautiful bright blue color. Let that crust over for probably at least an hour-ish, 30 to 60 minutes before doing these balloons. So I tried, or no, in my head, maybe. I thought about doing just one balloon because that would certainly simplify this design. But then I was like, you know what? I think it would look better with 3. So I just did this cute little cluster, but if you want to just do one balloon, that's totally fine too. The holes that I'm poking here are a new way to prevent craters in icing, craters in the balloons. I have found inconsistent success with this method. Honestly, I find inconsistent success with all methods attempting to prevent craters. Sometimes the stars align and sometimes they just don't. I don't know. I do think, though, that this technique is better done the drier the base layer. I feel like when you poke those holes when it's not that dry, it can compromise the integrity of that flood to begin with, and I feel like it can still sometimes cave in. I know the person that kind of has pioneered this, or at least showed it on social media for the first time, the Goodies Goddess, I believe is her handle on Instagram. She talks about even letting the base flood dry for an entire day and doing it the next day, which, if you've ever worked with oil icing, you know how revolutionary that is to be able to wait an entire day before doing a second layer. Because normally, before this method came out, the recommendation was always to do the second layer when the base flood has barely dried, which is usually around like 30 to 60 minutes. I just don't, I think being able to do the second layer the next day isn't especially helpful if you're doing large quantities. I don't do large quantities anymore, so that's not as appealing to me, or it's not as helpful, I should say. So, but I would say that the drier the base layer, I think the better that hole poke method way works. Did I say that right? Hole poke? Whatever. Somehow I can't find my words today. It's fine. If you don't want to do the poke method, you can always do the squiggle method. Another way to prevent craters is to just use the thickest consistency possible for every application. And you can also use a dehydrator, pop that in the dehydrator ASAP. Again, sometimes I feel like these things work and sometimes they don't. I still sometimes get craters. So I don't know, y'all. All right, moving on. I was having a complete brain fart about what this design was. Duh, Grace. Okay. So this is the other design that doesn't have sprinkles on it. This one actually originally had sprinkles, and I've never had to do this before, but I had to completely redo this entire design after I made the whole set. Super annoying, but super worth it. The reason I had to redo it, this is the candle design. And I originally put sprinkles on the candles. You'll see that I end up doing a little white piping detail. I did sprinkles because I was like, oh, this is easier. It goes with the sprinkle theme, yada, yada, yada. Now, I was concerned with sprinkles bleeding because that can happen, but I was more concerned with the sprinkles bleeding into the icing. So all of the sprinkles that I tested for this class, I tested on white icing and none of them bled. And I was like, great, these are all awesome. What I didn't think about was the icing bleeding into the sprinkles. So as you can see here, all of the sprinkles are sprinkles. All of the candles are different colors. And sidebar, you can see I'm doing the pokey poke method. Some people, by the way, do the poke and they put a squiggle on top. I don't know if those if putting the squiggle on top counteracts the poke. I don't really know. I just, if craters happen, they happen. Anywho, so I put the sprinkles on these candles and they ended up bleeding. The color of the icing bled into the white sprinkles. And I was like, well, white is part of the whole mix. And I was like, no, I didn't realize this until probably a day after they dried. And I looked at them and I was just like, oh no. And I honestly thought about if I could just talk my way out of it. Nope. Because I thought maybe it would only happen if your color is oversaturated. And the thing is, these are fairly saturated colors, but I don't think they're oversaturated. So I decided I needed to redo the design. And actually what I'm doing here is what I'd originally put on the candles when I first made the samples, or when I was making them. This was the first one I did. But then I was like, oh, this is maybe a little too hard for advanced beginner, blah, blah, blah. But I'm glad I went back to this because I like the pop from the white. Again, this is my soft peak. If your icing is a little on the thick side right now, you're probably going to be a little frustrated. But, live, you learn. And if you've been around a minute, I usually chop off the ends of my lines to make it a nice waterfall effect. But I do not have that much patience for these candles. No, ma'am. So I did something different on each of them just for funsies. But if you just want to do them all stripes, that's fine. If you want to do them all dots, all zigzags, whatever floats your boat. And then finish it off with pressure piped teardrops in an upwards motion, obviously, for the flames. This is my soft peak. You can get away with a soft peak for this pressure piped teardrop when it's just one. If you're doing cable knit or what's it called? Sweater cable. Soft peak often is too soft because they'll kind of melt into each other, which is no bueno. So next up, this is, what did I call this? Did I call this cake drip? I don't know. This is giving drip cake, Two of the cookies in this set are supposed to kind of invoke a cake, which again, thinking about what are some general universal birthday imagery things. I realized after the fact I could have done a present, but oh well. I like literal designs, and I also like less literal designs. So this one you could probably call maybe a slightly less literal one, or just more abstract. It's supposed to look like the side of a cake with a drip on it. So that's why I added this second layer here. It's supposed to look like the scraped side of a cake. I did decide to flood underneath because I just thought it needed that dimension. I did try this design by scraping it first, and it just didn't look right. So for the drip here, I am outlining and then flooding because our flood for this set is a thin flood. and that's just too thin to be piping on its own. I think the success to these drips is to make them fatter at the bottom, you can see, and thinner at the top, and then really giving space in between each drip. If you make them too close together, it just kind of ends up looking blobby. And then when you go to flood it in, kind of under flood it, because you're going to be adding sprinkles to it. Now, what is most likely then going to happen is it will probably crater. You can see I didn't do anything to try to prevent craters on this one. I don't know. Sometimes my brain is elsewhere. It's fine. So you could do the poke technique. You could add a squiggle, whatever floats your boat. And for this one, again, it's a sprinkle of sprinkles. Don't like smother your drip in sprinkles. And eventually I'm going to be done sprinkling. Just pushing the little cuties into their spots. Et voila, the cake drip. I think that's what I called it. And then, excuse me, I think this is the last one. So this one, this is one of my favorites from this set, if not my favorite. I was looking at all the designs. This might be my favorite one. I also love the happy birthday one. So this is supposed to look like a cake top, which is why we're starting with scraping. I decided to scrape for a couple of reasons. One, you're going to see with the design, it does end up being a good amount of icing. So I was like, might as well just scrape the bottom. And then two, it dries so much faster, and you'll see it just makes finishing this design a lot faster because we're going to do the sprinkle thing on top again. So for this one, you'll see I am using a piping tip, which I used piping tips, generally speaking, quite rarely. And in classes, even more rarely. I only use them when they really make a difference. And so, since I was really trying to evoke the top of a cake decorators most often use is this an open star? Yes, it's an open star tip. I'm blanking about which one I used in this set. I know that in the workbook for this class, I mentioned 3 different piping tips. I honestly, this might be the 21. No, don't quote me on that. This is why I do workbooks for all my classes, because I have all of the supplies listed. I feel like I might have mentioned 21, 18, 21, and 32, or 16, 21, and 32. I don't know. I picked the middle size one, whatever that range was, as like the Goldilocks perfect one. But I do mention that like you can make either of them work. And the order of this design is what is important, because you're doing the border first. So if your border ends up being a little bit smaller or a little bit thicker, no problem. Because then when you go in and you do the initial in the center, you just make the initial whatever size it can be. I would hazard against doing the initial first, because you don't really know how big your border is going to be. In this case, I did an H. I originally did a G, because I was like, well, what initial should I do? And I thought I would just do my initial. But I realized the G looked pretty similar to the 6 in the 16 number, and I wanted something different looking. So I went with an H. Same deal with the number. You can just kind of finesse that to your heart's desire. And you want to do this when the icing is still wet. Once it started to crust, like that, you can't do this because it's going to completely mess it up. But while it's freshly wet, no problema. We are in business. And that is it. I cannot tell you how proud I am of this set. Like, it just came to me one day what I should finally do. I've been thinking about this for probably at least a year. Again, this is my birthday class, thegracefulbakershop.com. It's linked in the description of the video. This is heavily customizable. You can leave designs out, change the color palette, change the number, change the letter, whatever makes your heart happy. And I hope you love this as much as I do. And as always, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. You learned a thing or two, and you might even try these cookies yourself. So that's all I've got for you today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Love y'all. Bye.